My American colleague on his first business trip to Tokyo tried to bond with our Japanese client during a formal dinner. He leaned in and asked, "So, Mr. Tanaka, what's your biggest regret in life?" I feel like you can really get to know a person by their failures. Mr. Muiz? Tanaka, who had been politely discussing the weather, froze with his chopsticks halfway to his mouth. The silence was deafening. Our translator later explained that asking such a deeply personal and negative question in a business setting was a catastrophic loss of face for everyone involved. I was in a pharmacy in Germany, and an American woman was waiting for her prescription. She turned to the German man next to her, who was clearly ill, and said with immense cheer, "So, what are you in for?" "I've got this wicked sinus infection," the doctor said. "My head is full of concrete. What's your ailment?" The man just stared at her, horrified, and mumbled, "Das ist private." He then took a large step away from her, clutching his stomach. She didn't understand that his medical condition was considered a deeply private matter, not a fun icebreaker. An American tourist at the cliffs of Moher in Ireland struck up a conversation with a local farmer overlooking the sea. After a few pleasantries, the American said, "You know, this is beautiful, but it's a real shame you guys lost that chunk of the country up north. When do you think you'll get it back?" The farmer's friendly demeanor vanished. He looked the American dead in the eye and said, "You're talking about a century of bloodshed, death, and families torn apart as if you're asking about a stray sheep. Enjoy the view," and walked away. My cousin from California was visiting me in Seoul, and we went to a barbecue restaurant. He tried to be friendly with the middle-aged waitress, calling her over by shouting, "Hey, sweetie, can we get some more kimchi over here?" The woman's face hardened. In Korea, addressing an older woman with such a casual, slightly demeaning term is incredibly disrespectful. She brought the kimchi, slammed it on the table without a word, and we received the coldest service imaginable for the rest of the night. He couldn't understand why she was so rude. I witnessed an American student trying to make friends on a packed commuter train in Switzerland. He stood up and announced, "Okay, this silence is killing me. My name is Chad. I'm from Arizona and I love snowboarding. Let's go around the carriage. Everybody say your name and your favorite hobby." The entire carriage of Swiss commuters pretended he didn't exist, with a level of synchronized, silent intensity that was almost terrifying. Chad eventually sat down, bright red, whispering to his friend, "Tough crowd." At a memorial for the Berlin Wall, I saw an American man approach a German woman who was quietly placing a flower on the ground. He patted her shoulder and said, "Pretty wild, huh? It's like a big history lesson. You know, we have a piece of this wall in a museum back in my hometown. It's a real tourist magnet." The woman, who was visibly emotional, flinched at his touch and gave him a look of pure contempt before turning her back to him. He had treated her moment of solemn remembrance like a casual chat at a theme park. An American businessman in our Helsinki office tried to break the ice with his Finnish counterpart, a quiet engineer named Matti. "Matti, my man, you're so quiet. You got to open up. Tell me something about yourself." "No, wait, let me guess. You're a secret agent, right?" Matti just stared at him without blinking and said, "No, I am an engineer." The American laughed, thinking it was a joke, but Matti simply returned to his work, leaving the American's attempt at humor to die in the silent, efficient Finnish air. I was at a cafe in Buenos Aires when an American tourist started talking to a local woman at the next table. He asked her where she was from, and she said she lived in the city. He replied, "Oh, cool. So, what do you think of the Falkland Islands? Do you guys still call them the Malvinas? Seems like a silly thing to still be upset about." The woman calmly finished her coffee, stood up and said, "It is not silly to the families of the 649 soldiers who died," and walked out. My American roommate in London invited a British girl from his class over for tea. He thought he was being charmingly direct when he asked her, "So, on a scale of 1 to 10, how do you rate me so far?" The girl, accustomed to British understatement and self-deprecation, was completely thrown. She stammered, I don't really think in those terms. He pressed on, come on, just give me a number. She made an excuse about having to leave and never spoke to him again. In a small family-owned restaurant in Naples, an American couple was frustrated by the relaxed pace of the meal. The husband called the owner over and said, look, we've been here for over an hour. In the States, we'd have been in and out in 25 minutes. Can you speed this up? We have things to see. The owner, a proud man in his 70s, looked deeply offended. He replied, sir, in my home, dinner is not a race. It is life. If you wish to eat quickly, McDonald's is 2 kilometers away. An American tourist in a crowded market in Marrakesh tried to compliment a woman on her djellaba. He approached her and her husband and said, wow, I love your outfit. It looks so comfortable. Is that what you wear when you're just, chilling at home? The husband immediately stepped in front of his wife, shielding her from view, and gave the American a stern look. The tourist had no idea he'd crossed a major boundary by directly addressing a woman he didn't know in such a familiar way. My boss, an American, was trying to connect with our new hire from India. He said, I just love Indian culture. I saw Slumdog Millionaire like 5 times. Your life must be so different and spiritual compared to ours. The new hire, who was from a wealthy family in Mumbai and had an MBA from Wharton, just smiled politely and said, yes, it is a country of many contrasts. The boss completely missed the subtle, icy correction in his tone. I was on a bus tour in Iceland, and the guide was explaining the folklore behind a specific rock formation. An American in the group interrupted him to ask, that's a nice story, but what's the property value like out here? Could I buy a piece of land and build a vacation home? What's the tax situation? The guide, who was passionately sharing a piece of his culture, looked completely deflated. He just said, I do not know, sir. I am a storyteller, not a real estate agent. An American exchange student in Spain was at a tapas bar with a group of locals. He tried to impress them by saying, I think it's so cool that you guys still have a king. It's like a real-life fairy tale. Do you ever see him around? A girl in the group, whose family were staunch Republicans from Catalonia, gave him a cold stare. For many of us, the monarchy is not a fairy tale. It is a painful and expensive political issue. The conversation immediately died. While visiting a war cemetery in Normandy, France, I overheard an American teenager complain to his father, this is so boring. It's just a bunch of graves. Why couldn't we go to Disneyland Paris? His father replied, now son, be respectful. These guys died so we could have places like Disneyland. He said it loudly enough for several French and British visitors who were there to mourn their own relatives to hear. The looks of disgust they received were palpable. An American woman at a public bath in Budapest tried to start a conversation with the Hungarian women relaxing in the thermal water. She gestured to one woman's C-section scar and said, oh, you had a C-section too, me too. My doctor totally botched the stitches, did yours? The Hungarian woman looked absolutely mortified that a complete stranger was pointing at and discussing her surgical scars in public. She submerged herself up to her neck and did not speak again. My American manager in our Singapore office couldn't understand why his team was so quiet in meetings. He tried to encourage participation by saying, come on people, don't be shy. There are no bad ideas. When no one spoke up, he pointed at a junior employee and said, Lee, you've been quiet. What do you think? He didn't realize that in that hierarchical culture, publicly putting a junior employee on the spot to critique a senior's plan was a recipe for extreme discomfort and loss of face. In a pub in Australia, an American tourist tried to engage in what he thought was friendly Aussie banter. He walked up to a large man with a beard and said, "G'day, mate. That's a pretty weak-looking beer you've got there. You should try a real American IPA." The Australian man slowly looked down at his pint of XXSX, then back up at the American, and said with a deadpan expression, "You've got 10 seconds to be somewhere else, mate." An American visiting his girlfriend's family in rural Poland for the first time tried to make small talk with her stern-looking grandfather. He asked, "So what was it like living under the communists?" "Must have been a real drag, huh?" The grandfather, who had been a political prisoner for 10 years, just stared into his soup. The girlfriend later explained that he had just asked a man to casually summarize decades of trauma and suffering as if it were a minor inconvenience. "I saw an American tourist in Vatican City trying to talk to a Swiss guard. He said, 'That's a wild uniform, man. You guys look like circus performers.' Do you have to get a special degree to learn how to use that halberd, or do they just give it to you?" The guard, trained to ignore any and all distractions, remained as still as a statue, his eyes fixed forward. The tourist, undeterred, took a selfie with the guard in the background, making a goofy face. An American expat in China was at a dinner and was asked his age. He replied, "A gentleman never tells." He thought he was being suave. His Chinese host was confused and slightly offended, as age is a common and perfectly normal question used to establish seniority and the correct way to address someone. By refusing to answer, he was seen as being difficult and secretive, not charming. While on a safari in Kenya, an American tourist tried to make conversation with the Maasai guide. "Your English is amazing. Did you learn it from watching movies? It must be so cool to live out here with all the animals and no stress." The guide, who had a degree in environmental science from the University of Nairobi, replied dryly, "Yes, my life is very simple. I just watch The Lion King and wrestle with giraffes." The sarcasm was completely lost on the tourist. An American woman in a cafe in Oslo, Norway, saw a mother with a baby sleeping in a stroller outside in the cold. She rushed inside and exclaimed to the barista, "Oh my God, someone left their baby outside. We have to call the police." The barista calmly explained that it's common practice in Nordic countries for babies to nap outside in the fresh air. The American argued with her for several minutes, insisting it was child abuse, unable to accept a cultural norm so different from her own. My American friend was meeting my very reserved British parents for the first time. Trying to be friendly, he asked my father, "So David, tell me about your relationship with your father. Were you guys close?" My dad, who is from a generation where men never discussed emotions, nearly choked on his tea. He just said he was a fine man, and then talked about the weather for the next 20 minutes, a clear signal that the topic was closed. In a restaurant in Lisbon, an American tourist was unhappy with his meal. When the waiter came to clear the plates, the American said, "I'm just going to give you some constructive criticism, because I'm a helper." The fish was overcooked and the sauce was bland. The Portuguese waiter and the nearby tables were horrified by his public, unsolicited critique. He thought he was being helpful. They thought he was being an arrogant, insulting guest. An American backpacker in a hostel in New Zealand tried to start a debate in the common room. He announced, "I think rugby is a dumb sport. It's just a bunch of guys running into each other. In America, we have football, which is way more strategic." He said this to a room full of Kiwis, many of whom consider rugby to be something close to a religion. The friendly atmosphere in the room instantly evaporated. I was on a flight to Cairo, and an American man was trying to chat with the Egyptian man sitting next to him. He asked, "So are you excited to go home? I bet you can't wait to ride a camel to your pyramid." The Egyptian man looked at him and said, "I am a professor of computer science at the American University in Cairo. I live in a modern apartment and I drive a Toyota. I have never ridden a camel in my life." An American woman at a high-end department store in Milan tried to get a discount by being overly familiar with the sales associate. "Come on, let's be friends. What's the friends and family price on this handbag? Just between us girls." The Italian sales associate, a model of professional decorum, looked at her as if she had grown a second head. She replied coolly, "The price is the one indicated on the tag, signora." My American colleague was in a meeting with potential business partners from the UAE. He tried to build rapport by asking one of the Emirati men, "So how's the wife? Is she as beautiful as the architecture around here?" The man he was speaking to did not react, but his colleague immediately stepped in and changed the subject. He had no idea that asking directly about another man's wife is a serious breach of etiquette and considered highly inappropriate. An American tourist in a small village in the Greek islands tried to make conversation with an elderly woman dressed in black. "Hi there. Why the black clothes? Is it a fashion statement? You should try some brighter colours, it would really lift your spirits." The woman, who was in a traditional period of mourning for her late husband, just stared at him with deep, sorrowful eyes and said nothing. He had mistaken a profound cultural sign of grief for a style choice. I was at a university pub in Canada, and an American student was talking to a guy from Quebec. The American said, "I don't get why you guys insist on speaking French. We're all in North America. Shouldn't we all just speak English to make things easier?" The Quebecois student, whose identity and culture are deeply tied to the French language, launched into a passionate 10-minute history of linguistic persecution and cultural preservation that left the American completely bewildered.